You're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It's Opera Box Score. I'm George Cedarquist, joined this week by Oliver Camacho, Weston Williams, and Ashley Hardgrave. All right, in this episode, in an act of true sportsmanship, we introduce you to a rival podcaster, Daniel Gundlach, host and producer of Countermelody. He may be our foe, but he deserves your compassion, all Ted Lasso-like. And then PJ checks in from NYC, having taken his son to Lohengrin. Man, that guy has guts. Plus, in the 2-minute drill, the ring cycle is going down under. Find out if Fasselt and Fafner will find gold inside their bloomin' onion. Make sure you subscribe.
Was that a
to
leprechaun? I don't understand.
Podcast.
I think that was a
Stitcher
hate
and
crime,
Spot-
but we'll move on.
Okay, no, let's just. Okay, look, I'm not great. I'm not great on the accents. All right, I'm trying. I just read the jokes that the people put in front of me. Oliver Camacho, you are one of the jokes in front of me right now.
Nice, Vern. Thank you. That's what we need on this show. We need like some spice, you know? People tune in for the spice in the sports. Maybe we should change the name of our podcast to
the Spice Girls?
Spice, Sports, and Sopranos.
Ooh, delicious.
That's actually a really good name for a podcast.
Yeah.
What do you think, Weston? You like or you don't like?
Oh, I do. I mean, like I am. I mean, if you ask anyone who knows me, I'm the guy who is like, when I'm making dinner, I'll be like, what is the weirdest thing I can put into this meal? Like the other day, I was making caramelized onions. No, I was making caramelized onions and I was like, what if I put in some curry powder? What if I put in some bay leaves, which was a bad idea? What if I put in some white pepper? What if I did this? What if I did that until the next thing you know, your caramelized onions are mostly orange juice.
Tummy ache.
You know?
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, I don't
like
recommend
recipes.
it.
Ashley, have you been cooking? Have you been watching basketball? What have you been doing?
A little bit of both, and I've gotten about as much spice as I need from the Women's National Championship that was last night. I know I praised Caitlin Clark on this show last week, and she was very deserving of it. Very, very deserving. But she's got a little bit of sass and a little bit of attitude on the court, and people have been praising her for it and saying, oh, she's so good, she's so good. And then we had this game between her Iowa and Angel Reese's Louisiana State. LSU ended up taking the national championship. Angel Reese mimics some of that behavior of Caitlin Clark. And then all of a sudden, magically, she was considered to be unsportsmanlike, and somebody used the word thuggish. And I don't, Black, have any idea why they would use a double standard for these two athletes. Black, I'm not really sure why Caitlin Clark White would be looked at differently than Black Angel Reese. But anyway, it's just interesting to see how all of that plays out. But at any rate, congratulations to LSU on their national championship.
The men's championship being played just a few moments. I don't even know if we're going to be able to update
about a half an hour
folks.
from now.
Yeah, exactly. Florida Atlantic, who we had picked to go to the final, lost on a buzzer beater to San Diego State by a single point. UConn, however, in the final and tipped to win by over 7 points. We'll see what happens. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
So you'll get this introduction again after we hear a little bit of Daniel Gundlach's Countermelody. But I mainly wanted to bring on Daniel because in the absence of Matt Cummings all these weeks, I've been missing just that level,
intelligence, and
just
that
that level, that level of expertise, that passion, that like willing to do all the research and to learn everything about an artist, which you can hear on Countermelody. So without further ado, here's a little bit of what Countermelody sounds like.
These are just the final roulades of the Je veux vivre. This performance took place on the 15th of December 1967.
just a little bit of delightful audio from a podcast that Opera Box Score is recommending you check out. It's called Countermelody. And the host is countertenor, coach, teacher, and writer Daniel Gunzlach. Welcome to Opera Box Score.
Thank you so much, Oliver.
So I wanted to bring you on because one of our co-hosts sort of has the same level of passion about recordings and about singers' histories and biographies as you do. And his name is Matt. And Matt has been absent from the podcast for a couple of weeks because he's a working singer. And so when he's done with all of his gigs, he'll be able to rejoin us. I've been missing the type of content that he provides for us. And I stumbled across your podcast looking for podcasts about singers. And
he's the one who did the Martina Arroyo a few weeks ago, right? That was so fantastic. I absolutely loved it. And he's so informed.
Yeah, isn't he great?
It's really wonderful to hear someone with that level of enthusiasm. Yeah.
Well, you've been doing this since 2019 and you're approaching 200 episodes. So we want to get you some of our Opera Box Score listeners by the time you celebrate 200. But I guess we should just start why did you begin this?
Well, somehow I found myself an American expat in Berlin, and my performing career, for a number of reasons, was really coming to an end, and I had to figure out something to do with my life so that I had a reason to get up in the morning, quite honestly. And I had, this sort of parable experience, which I don't need to go into, but the moral of that real life parable for me was, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. It was that sort of thing. And I had in the back of my mind for a while the idea of doing a podcast, but I kept putting it off or putting it on the back burner. And it occurred to me that it was just time to do it. So I did a crowdfunding thing in the fall of 2019. And I launched the podcast at the end of September in 2019, the same year. And it just so happened that it was right before the pandemic, of course. So it came at a very good time for me, while all working singers were sitting at home, dreadfully feeling bereft and rudderless. I had to put out this podcast every single week. And as you know yourself, it's a lot of work. And this is a one-man operation. I'm Ma, I'm Pa, I'm, Countermelody. It's entirely a one-man show. And that has its pros and cons, but I certainly don't have to answer to anybody else. The ideas, the content, it's all mine. So
well, let's give the audience a chance to understand what is the thesis of the podcast. Like, what is a typical episode?
A typical episode.
A typical episode to me is you paying tribute to a singer, and
yes,
going
that's
to
a common thing that I do. Now, if I'm having a really busy week, I'll put together sort of an omnibus episode, like spring songs or different versions of the four last songs or Verdi birthday tribute or something like that. That's a little bit more compact and easier to put together.
And takes less research.
Yes, it takes a little less research. It's true. And then that's related more to just personal taste then, right? I don't have to give a big introduction to the four last songs. I just had to choose versions that I really like. So if I'm having a tough week and I'm doing freelance work, money-making work that's taking up too much time, then that's the sort of thing that I'll choose. But my favorite kind of episode is choosing a singer that I absolutely love, that I think maybe is not well enough known by today's audience, and presenting them in all of their majesty and glory, honestly.
Well, that gives us a chance to listen to a little bit of music right now. One of the sort of brand ideas of your show is the idea of a great discovery, and introducing the audience to somebody that you've discovered and you really want to share their artistry and, create awareness. And I think one of the singers you wanted to talk about today was Muriel Smith.
I am mad from Muriel Smith. I discovered her by accident when I was putting together my first Christmas episode. And I was listening to something by the tenor Luther Saxon, and I was doing a little research into who he was. And I found that he was the original Joe in Carmen Jones. And as I was exploring Carmen Jones, I found that the creator of that role, the title role, was Muriel Smith, who at the time was still a student at Curtis. And she was the first African-American student to attend there. So that immediately captured my interest. And when I heard the voice and the interpretive power of her music making, I just was completely blown away. Then I started collecting some really rare 78s of pop music that she had done, because she eventually went over to Great Britain, where she created for the West End the role of Bloody Mary, the role of Lady Tiang in The King and I. So all of those sort of exoticized roles where nevertheless they get to sing, one of these really noble songs, or at least Bloody Mary gets to sing Bali High, Happy Talk is something else, I guess. But she, and not only that, but the voice that you hear on the film version of the South Pacific movie, even though it's played by Juanita Hall, who of course created the role on Broadway, you hear Muriel Smith's voice, because Richard Rodgers loved her voice, and he insisted that her voice be used in the movie. Well, so you don't see her, but you hear her.
Let's listen to some Muriel Smith right now. I'll reveal our hand and say that we're going to add in a clip in post-production. So we'll give you the proper credit of what this piece is after we wrap up our interview.
Let the past just fade away. Why get lost in yesterday? The important thing is here and now, and our love is here to stay. Mine was a young and a foolish heart, seeking love at every turn. But I have grown so much wiser now, even foolish hearts can learn. Let the past just fade away. Why get lost in yesterday? The important thing is here and now, here and now, and our love is here to stay.
She sings pop music with such immediacy, with such vitality, but also almost like a bel cantista, like she's singing. She has such incredible lines, such beautiful legato, and yet she manages to really highlight the words. And for me, when I was pursuing my singing career, those were the most important things to me, were, singing with line, singing with my whole body, and really finding a way of communicating the words and the meaning of the words without ever, finding a way of blending those things, the legato line with the commitment to the words. And that is what I hear in the voice of Muriel Smith. And she is really the one of the greatest examples I've ever heard of that.
Well, I want to go back to how you put together an episode, and you've already hinted that you are using multiple sources like 78s, and you're living in Berlin. I can't say that here in Chicago I could find many record stores that still maintain a classical shelf, let alone shelves. So what's it like finding, as you call them, curios over there in Germany?
Well, I order a lot of stuff from the website Discogs, where there's an incredible listing of stuff. And most of that stuff, I don't know if that website originated in Germany, but a lot of the sellers are in Germany. And so I can get my hands on this stuff relatively quickly. And, when I moved into this present apartment just over 4 years ago, I had maybe 10 LPs. And now the entire apartment is just overrun with these things, because every week when I choose to do a specific singer, for instance, one that I did recently is the Polish baritone Andrzej Hiolski. And if anybody knows him at all, it's because he created some important roles and pieces of Penderecki. The Lucas Passion he created the role of Grandier in Devils of Loudun. And so if he
also recorded King Roger, didn't he?
Yes, and it is sublime. And I included that on my episode about him. And it turns out that I have a friend, an old friend, who's an enthusiastic listener to the podcast, who knows his son, who lives in Chicago. And this is the greatest thing that ever happens to me with the podcast, as far as I'm concerned, when I hear from people who either I've done them as a subject, like the Scottish soprano Margaret Marshall or George Shirley, and I hear from them and they are so enthusiastic and appreciative of my work, or when I hear from the children of these artists, who, the artist may no longer be alive, but they have progeny. And I heard from the African-American Charles Holland's son, and he said that it was wonderful for him to get this reminder of his father's importance, of his significance, his artistic significance, and his, just his historical importance. So that to me is so important.
We're speaking today to Daniel Gunzlach, the producer and host and everyman of Countermelody podcast. And I have one more question I want to ask you. Actually, I want to ask you to do a little exercise here to whet the appetite of our listeners and do something that you have done on your own show, which is rehabilitate an artist with perhaps a maligned reputation, or maybe has given poor performances, which has created some disreputation of their artistry. Who would you like to, quote unquote, rehabilitate right now?
Well, there are so many that I could, but in our pre-recording discussions, I decided that I really wanted to talk about Maria Ewing.
The late Maria Ewing.
I'm almost going to start to cry, because I saw her twice. I saw her actually 3 times. I saw her do Blanche on the Met Tour when I was just a young slip of a thing. And I didn't get to see Shirley Verrett do Les Douanes, but I saw Crespin sing Croissy, and I saw Maria Ewing, and it was an absolutely shattering experience. And they're still doing that production amazingly, but it is one of the great things that the Met has ever done, I think. But Maria Ewing, for me, was just supreme in that part. Her commitment, and her acting chops, and at that stage, really her singing as well, were beyond compare. I really think of her as one of the great singing actors. Now, years later, I also saw her do Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk. It was virtually unlistenable at that point. It sounded like she was inhaling as she was singing, but I could not take my eyes off of her. It was one of the most compelling acting performances that I've ever seen anywhere. particularly on the operatic stage. The following year, I also saw her do Marie and Wozzeck. That was I think the last thing she ever sang at the Met, I think. But again, a singer of such integrity, again, somebody who would, would cut herself and bleed to communicate to the audience what was central to the role. And what's fascinating to me is that for the most part, she maintained some kind of vocal integrity as well. Now, she sounded awful in both of those last roles that I mentioned, but that was not typical of her work. There's also a recording that I found on YouTube of her singing from the time that she was doing that Marie and Wozzeck, a recording of her doing the Lamento d'Arianna of Monteverdi, arranged by Carl Orff with the New York Philharmonic. And it had been broadcast, and she is so riveting, and she sings so beautifully. And I found also a very late clip of her, about 10 years before she died, singing the role in La Voix Humaine. And again, with what I would consider, a compromised vocalism, perhaps, but it was not. She just got a really bad rap for a lot of stuff. But if when I was studying her videos, for instance, of Carmen, which she was so maligned for, but those are incredible performances, both of the videos that are extant of her. And they're also very, very beautifully sung, which comes as a surprise to people, I think. So I had been planning an episode. I always do a great big production for Black History Month because it's so important to me to really foreground those singers. And I had been planning to do, she was going to be my first episode in February 2022. And then I remember this. We were taking a trip to Vienna, and I arrived with all of my Maria Ewing material and to the news that she had just died. And I felt like I had just been torn in half, and so I just thought, okay, this has got to be one of the best episodes I've ever done, because she's so important to me. Well, and I think I managed. I've had so many people speak about how much that episode in particular meant to them. So,
well, that will be, let's see, episode number, what's between 125 and 129. So if you're using the Apple Podcast app, you'll have to scroll down to get to that's from February of 2022.
You can't search on Apple Podcasts?
Just on their webpage, not on. Yeah,
that's not very convenient. But I do try, if someone has a birthday, or if there's a reason to really highlight a past episode that I've done, I do have one of those. Oh God, I can't even remember what it's called, but one of those
pop stylings.
Yeah, one of those where you just kind of put a link to an episode of past episode, and I also do a lot of postings on both Instagram and Facebook of these episodes with the link so that people can go right to it and listen to the episode.
Wonderful.
So,
well, we're gonna drop in a little bit of Maria Ewing. I'll let you finish what you're saying, but we're gonna drop in some Maria Ewing very shortly. Go ahead. What were you about to say?
I don't even remember. It's not that important. But just that I know that sometimes it's not so easy to find the podcasts, but I do try to keep presenting them, I guess, so that if there's
like on your social media to say, hey, remember I did this episode. Yes,
exactly.
Well, so I think that's a great place to stop, and for people to check out the Maria Ewing episode on Countermelody. And Daniel, thank you so much for doing all of this work. I think I have to say that you and I are kindred spirits, and that it feels like a vocation to share what we love, but also to do the hard work and the research so that these artists' legacies will live on longer than, these people who don't have websites anymore, they don't have publicists anymore. So it's up to us, the fans, to keep their artistry at the forefront. So I really do appreciate your show and all the work.
I will just say that, this is part of my heritage, shall I say, because my father was a minister, and I often feel like I'm doing a little bit of proselytizing. We didn't have all that much in common, and we certainly didn't, share many values, but I do appreciate that aspect of his life, that that he was so passionate about what he brought to his congregation. And I don't have a congregation, but I do have a devoted listenership, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to present to people these magnificent artists.
In that interview, you heard two selections. The first one was sung by Muriel Smith. That was How Important Can It Be? That was a rare 1955-78. The band leader on that recording was Wally Scott, who now identifies as Angela Morley. And the second clip was the late Maria Ewing, from a live telecast with the New York Philharmonic. That was Monteverdi's Lament of Ariana in the orchestration by Karl Orff, sung in German.
As it was intended.
Yes.
Well, you might subscribe to Countermelody, countermelodypodcast.com, but you want to make sure you subscribe to our podcast, Stitcher and Spotify. You're going to click follow, Apple Podcasts.
So the call to action on Countermelody is never to subscribe. It's always give me money. If you want to see this thing, go on, give me money. So he must have gotten because he always thanks, he starts each episode by thanking his new Patreons. So maybe we need to.
All right.
Yeah. We could take a leaf from that book. Give us money and also listen and subscribe.
Yeah, you got something to say? Then yeah, all right, you can say something. This is Listener Mailbag.
Hello, Opera Box Score. This is PJ Ewing. I'm here at the Met yet again, seeing Lohengrin. Just wow. It's the first intermission. We've just finished Act 1. And the set is just stunning. There is a screen, a visual screen, a digital projected image, gigantic, behind a hole in the sky, let's call it, under which you see the gigantic chorus. It's just scope and scale, and what the Met, I think, does very well in this case. Huge voices, yeah, of course, a beautiful production. It has not been here for 17 years, so here we are seeing one of the first operas the Met ever did back in 1883. They say, days after the house became a house and the company became a company, they did Lohengrin. way back then, and now we have it here again after a 17-year hiatus. I remember seeing this when I was so young, probably in my teens back in Michigan when the Met did their tour. I remember I saw a week's worth of opera, and this was one of them. The Swan theme rings in my head from those days as well. So much fun reporting to you from the Metropolitan Opera. This is PJ. Back to the show.
He even cares about our transitions.
He's like our sixth host.
Well, he's really like our fifth because Matt's never here. So.
Oh man, this whole show is just—it's all spice tonight. It's all spice. No, so here's the backstory of PJ, because he and I did a bit of emailing. So he clearly taped that while he was at the Met.
The first intermission. Right. So.
Yes, and he had written to me, and he was like, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to take Finn, my 12-year-old son, to see Lohengrin tomorrow." I guess he was going back maybe to see it again. I don't think the son was there when he taped the listener mailbag for us. But he said, "I'm not sure we're going to witness Act 3 due to length," which was pertinent given your interesting conversation last week about baseball shortening the games and opera companies looking to their new audiences. I checked with him today, and he writes to me, "Okay, so cards on the table. We did not make it to Act 3. And then he goes on to say, "Nor did I make it to Act 3 the first time I saw it. It was a school night and all that."
He's never seen Act 3, not even once.
He says, I listened on my own to complete the story, but man, this thing is long. And it's true. Lohengrin, we were talking about running times again, 3 hours, 55 minutes. It's 3-actor, 70 minutes, 85 minutes, 80 minutes. It's
hilarious that the opera's most famous music is in the third act. the wedding march. It's like, that's why everybody goes. It's like when you hear the O mio babbino caro moment, or like
there's a lot of good moments before then, though. I mean, I feel like Lohengrin is a kind of an underrated opera in Wagner's repertoire. It's kind of bops all the way through. It's the first Wagner opera, I think, that feels like a full experience. It doesn't have like any of the wonkiness of like, Flying Dutchman or whatever,
That brings up a question, since we have a little time. What is the opera that you will always finish? Like, let's say you go to the theater to see it, and like, it's long, but you always will wait till the end. Or maybe you are like in your car and you turn on the radio and it's a Met broadcast. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know this was playing today. Or maybe like me, you're creating tons of content all the time, and you go to your Spotify and you start an opera and you realize, I haven't heard this in a while, I need to hear the whole thing. I'll start because the show that I cannot seem to stop listening to if I hear any part of it is Tales of Hoffman, I realize.
Oh, really? Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because it has so many different, characters, and each act has its own flavor.
Sure.
And there's definitely like a progress of the tenor throughout the show, because it's like the Norma of lyric tenor roles. Like, it's so comprehensive. You want to see like, how is he going to negotiate this? Is he going to get through this phrase? It's like, can he do it? There's that aspect of it. And plus, I think the tunes are so good. And plus, I'm also listening to hear what version they're using, because there's so many cuts, standard cuts otherwise, that are done to that opera. You never know really what version of the opera you're going to get until you hear the whole thing. So for me, it's Tales of Hoffman. What about you, Weston? What show will you listen to all the way through?
I mean, there's so many. I've always been big. My whole thing is I am not the kind of person who, I'm not a compilation album kind of person. I don't like the idea of listening to pieces from an opera or a symphonic work out of context of the entire piece. Really, for me, it's all about my busy lifestyle, right? It's what I have time for. As much as I would love to like listen through Parsifal every time it shows up in my shuffle, I just don't have time. But I will say, last week, the only thing I really use my shuffle for is like, on my phone is to like, if I don't quite know what mood I'm in, I'll shuffle and like see like what comes up. And I did shuffle to a 20-minute opera by Paul Hindemith called Sancta Susanna, and I wasn't planning on listening to that for those 20 minutes, but I did. It was the whole thing, and it's fun. It's got this like long organ pedal tone for like 15 minutes at the very beginning, and it ends with a satanic exorcism.
Okay, listen,
it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
So actually, what is the opera that like once you start listening to it, you cannot stop listening to it? Besides the Hindemith 20-minute opera.
So there are two, and I put a qualifying question into our chat. I was like, do I get to clean my house while I listen? Because if I'm honest, most of the time when I'm listening to classical music, it's because I'm like doing other things around my house. I'm vacillating between that and podcasts. And if that's the case, and this is going to make me a basic bitch and I don't care, Cozy.
Yeah, I love it.
I love the music in Cozy is just beautiful. Now, it is also the opera that I never need to see again in a theater, ever. But the music itself is just so gorgeous that it just, I mean,
it's
Suave.
Cozy fan tutte.
There it is. We've been waiting for that, Jug Weston. Thank you. With a runner-up, weirdly enough, Trouble in Tahiti. There's something about the ratty booze. They stay with me, I listen to them a lot. Okay. Yeah.
Nice.
George, do you have one?
When I listen to Handel's Giulio Cesare,
I mean, we all know it's actually the Mikado, but
I just want to go to sleep and never. No, for me, it's very easy. It's Britain's Midsummer Night's Dream. It is
good choice.
That is a good choice. Yeah.
Listen, the reason we go to the theater is very simple. When we're listening to a story, all we want to know is what happens next, and even in Midsummer, if you know the Shakespeare play, the Britain opera, what is going to happen next musically is always my question. The spell is cast with all these different colors, timbres, textures in the instrumentation, the orchestration, and it is so magical.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
Conductor John Mauceri is producing a world premiere of an opera by Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer. Blues Opera was written to feature an all-black cast in the late 1950s, but it was never performed as conceived by its creators. The opera already has Angel Blue signed onto the project and the endorsement of classical music disruptor and friend of the show, Garrett McQueen.
Sonia Yoncheva will release her first book this May, but it's not an autobiography or a screed against Zachary Wolfe. 15 Mirrors collects the confessions and meditations of a contemporary woman who has the privilege to live under the skin of many other extraordinary women, says Yoncheva. I have chosen for you 15 of these characters as a symbol of my first 15 years on stage. Amongst them, you will recognize a few that I haven't had the chance to sing yet, but who inhabit my dreams and plans for the future.
And Yoncheva is also returning to the Met. Per her Instagram, which is now run in a Beyonce-style third-party state, her handlers said, Sonia was happy to be back at the Met listening to Tosca, conducted by Domingo Hendoyan. Sonia is looking forward to returning home to Europe now, but she can't wait to be back at the Met in 2025 for an exciting role debut.
Melbourne Opera, a regional company not known for lavish large-scale productions, has brought Wagner's epic Ring cycle to the very small town of Bendigo, Australia. It fits, said stage director Suzanne Shandy. Creating a whole festival environment in a relatively small town gives it a concentrated hotbed feeling. Despite mobilizing the entire town to put on the cycle, only 9% of attendees have been Bendigo residents.
Washington National Opera has announced Catherine Goforth as the inaugural recipient of the True Voice Award, developed to create space for artists who identify as transgender or non-binary. The award is the brainchild of filmmaker Kimberly Reed, composer Laura Kaminsky, and librettist Mark Campbell, the creative team behind the opera as one. Goforth, who sings in the tenor register, wins a chance to perform a recital and a cash prize of $5,000.
The 2023 Olivier Award for Best New Opera Production went to Richard Jones's Alcina at the Royal Opera House, and the Outstanding Achievement in Opera went to director-designer William Kentridge for the chamber opera Sybil at the Barbican.
An Austrian man protesting pension rights glued himself to the famed golden piano in the grand lobby of the Parliament, calling the piano, quote, a symbol of decadence and aloofness. it's probably a pain to tune to.
POP, or Paris Opera Play, is Paris Opera's new streaming platform, which will present live performances along with a catalog of on-demand productions. POP aims to make the company more accessible to foreign viewers and those who cannot afford to attend in person, with a maximum subscription fee of less than €10 a month.
Was that a little shady towards poor people? In trade news, Colombian conductor and violinist Andrés Orozco Estrada will become the next music director of Cologne Opera. Orozco Estrada previously served as the music director of Houston Symphony Orchestra and as principal conductor of Frankfurt Radio Symphony Orchestra.
On the disabled list, Yannick Nézet-Séguin bowed out of world premiere performances of John Luther Adams' Vespers of the Blessed Earth in Philadelphia and New York City due to illness. Donald Nally, Austin Chanu, and Marin Alsop split conducting duties for last weekend's performances, as Nézet-Séguin also withdrew from a performance at the Met.
Exit stage right, countertenor James Bowman has died at the age of 81. Bowman was the first countertenor to sing at Glyndebourne, making his debut as Endymione opposite the Callisto of Janet Baker. In addition to the core countertenor Baroque repertoire, he also enjoyed success in contemporary music, creating roles in operas by Benjamin Britten, Peter Maxwell Davies, and Michael Tippett.
Spanish tenor Pedro La Virgen has died at 92. Known primarily for his work in zarzuelas, La Virgen sung a number of roles in traditional opera houses, including Vienna State Opera, Royal Opera House, La Scala, and the Met. He received a number of awards in his career, including the Spanish National Theatre Award, the Gold Medal of the Circle of Fine Arts, and the Verdi de Oro.
And on this day, April 3rd, in 1649, it was the birth of French composer Joseph-François Salomon, whose first opera, Médée et Jason, was composed at the age of 52. In 1831, it was the first performance of Pietro Raimondi's Il Giulio Sabino in Naples, and that tidbit of information comes from our very own Anthony Baresi. In 1843, the Leipzig Conservatory opened under the directorship of Felix Mendelssohn. In 1871, one for PJ, it was the American premiere of Wagner's Lohengrin, all 3 acts of it. In 1895, Italian-American composer Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco was born in Florence. And in 1925, on April 3rd, Gustav Holst's opera At the Boar's Head premiered in Manchester.
And that's your 2-minute drill.
Just a little bit of the great late James Bowman singing from Handel's Messiah with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. That was a recording from 1972. And, you know, I hang with a lot of countertenors. Friend of the show, Yesson Davies, is actually collecting stories about James Bowman, who apparently was a very funny guy. This is from Yesson Davies' Facebook. It appears that James Bowman's death has brought about one of the largest tellings of wonderfully funny stories from his life, which would be no surprise to anyone who knew him. It reminded me of one more to add to the collection. We were talking about Britten's A Midsummer Night's Dream and how once he heard James sing Oberon, Britten said he would like to rewrite and expand the role for your voice. James then took a beat, but then he died, which was awkward.
So marvelously English.
Yeah.
So marvelously English.
The stiffest of upper lips.
We could talk about all the new music he sang, but famously, he created the role of Apollo in Death in Venice by Britten.
Mm-hmm,
wow. Wow. Amazing. The blues opera then, Johnny Mercer, I think of course, the Great American Songbook.
Yeah.
Same with Arlen.
So it seems like this show, written in the 50s, supposed to be in the vein of like a Porgy and Bess, where you have like these, American standards. They didn't call them standards back in their day, but these were like classic American songbook guys who wanted to pay tribute to the Black community, and they wrote an opera with an all-black cast, a la Porgy and Bess. And this is really hard to navigate this because we want there to be more operas that have Black casts that are not Porgy and Bess. We want the music to be good. We want them to be produced again and again. So maybe here is one. And if Garrett McQueen endorses it, then I think we can sort of just like say, okay, well, that we can cross that off the list. Like, he's not going to speak out against it, which is usually the obstacle for a lot of creators,
Well, I mean, musically, yes, it's like Porgy and Bess. Thematically, it's not. One of the pros that McQueen mentions in this Billboard article is, that they're sick of hearing about stories of like the misfortunes and the trials and tribulations, and only featuring like the struggle of poor Black folk in their in their themes. And this is more about like well-to-do, higher society, so showing people in sort of measures of success in a more traditional way. So that's one of the things that I think has people like McQueen and some of the other folks from Black Opera Alliance kind of more on the positive side, because on its face, let's reorchestrate and get on its feet an opera about Black people written by two white dudes in the 50s. Like, that's not a good byline.
Right.
So you do have to dig considerably deeper. So the more I read in this article on Billboard, the more I got nervous and was like, oh no, this is a terrible idea. And then I got to Garrett's little vote of confidence, and I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to stick with it.
Along with Angel Blue being signed on, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So something that maybe doesn't need to see the light of day is this Sonia Yoncheva book.
Are you kidding? I want a signed copy.
So first of all, it's 89 euros.
It's a coffee table book.
That's expensive.
Yeah, it's a coffee table book.
Yeah.
It's a coffee table book. She's not exactly topless on the cover, but just looking at the cover and reading her own little blurb about it, is this going to be like Madonna's book Sex? Do you remember when that came out in the like late 90s, I think it was?
Which was also a coffee table book.
Born.
But,
I think that's a stretch, but because I don't think it'll be that provocative. Because that book, when Madonna's book came out, boy howdy, I think this is going to be a collector's item for some very, very, very specific people who are super fine with Sonia's team speaking about her in third person on her social media. Ashley Hargrave is only mildly excited about the release of this book. Ashley may or may not read this book, but Ashley will not be purchasing this book.
It's basically just cosplay for Sonia Yoncheva, to show herself in 15 different outfits, and based on her social media, which she no longer writes. She's not much of a writer, so the fact that it's a picture book.
Sonia definitely writes all of those statements herself.
She's also not a native English speaker, so like mocking her for her English, which is not what you're doing.
I didn't mock her for English.
I just said
I
know it's not what you're doing, but that's just.
Yeah. But anyway, she looks pretty in her costume.
For
so,
sure.
Yeah.
We can tread lightly, but like, here's the thing. You and me and everybody we know has at least one opera queen, gender reserved, because opera queens can be anybody. There is going to be an opera queen in your circle that's going to be really excited about this book. Is it going to be me? No, but it's going to be someone we know.
Exactly. Well, I guess less than 10% of the Bendigo, Australia residents are excited about this production of the Ring Cycle.
That's what happens, I think it's very interesting that this production is going on in general, just because, The Ring, no matter what company is doing it, it's such a huge push of resources. And apparently what happened in Melbourne was that there was not like a suitable location they could find in the season to like to figure out how to put it on. All the theaters were taken up, I guess. So they're like, well, we've got this connection to this little tiny town. Let's go and do it there and make it sort of like, a sort of a Glyndebourne-y kind of experience where you're going down into the country to see some opera. And I actually love the idea.
A weekend in the country with some glowing grins. A weekend in the
Well, here's the thing. First of all, let's just drill down a little bit about Bendigo. So population 100,000. It has a cathedral, which is Australia's third tallest church building.
Oh, interesting.
And that's all I got.
He used up the entire Wikipedia page for that one, folks. I mean, I think that it's obviously for a town of 100,000, like, you know, I honestly, almost 10% is a pretty solid number for a town of that size. I think fairly respectable. I do think that there's, you know, something to be said for, like, you know, obviously here in America, I think we're all about, like, you know, making sure the opera really connects with the community, trying to, like, you know, bring the specific community that you are in into the opera. And that's not really what this is. This is very much following the English country model, where it is a destination. A lot of and it makes sense for the ring cycle too, because you'll have people coming from overseas. The Guardian article I pulled this story out of mentions that there were people coming from as far away as, like, Rhode Island, you know. Like, people will come from a long way for Wagner, and the demand for tickets is a lot of people who are coming from, you know, outside the area. And
well, they want to see the
nice.
Show. I mean, if the show's not being done in Sydney, clearly people are going to travel.
The Ring is just one of those shows that, like, people, like,
they
plan they plan their, you know, PTO around going to see Ring. So I mean, I think it's great that now they get to see Bendigo and that cathedral.
Yeah, they're gonna be like, wow, best third largest cathedral I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up this item by saying that Bendigo's sister city is Penzance in England.
Wow,
that's where the pirates are, I hear.
I don't know what to say other than William Kentridge annoys me.
Great.
William Kentridge is from South Africa. He's a director. He's a designer. What don't you do, Bill? I don't like his productions. I find them really irritating, and I don't know this show, Sybil at the Barbican. So who am I to criticize something I haven't seen? Weston?
I quite like William Kentridge's stuff, so, you know.
Richard Jones.
Let
me just say this too. Now, Richard Jones wins the Olivier for Alcina at the Royal Opera House. Was I not singing Richard Jones's praises on this very show just episodes ago? It shows you what an iconic director he is and how smart I am.
Okay, so yeah, it does. So you already talked about what are the trademarks of Richard Jones, but what are the trademarks of William Kentridge if you hate him so much?
So he's an illustrator by trade, and so all of his designs basically look like they were done with a fountain pen. So there's a lot of cross-hatching on the stage. He did the Wojciech that was at the Met some years ago. It feels like
Lulu as well.
Lulu. So like he'll have a backdrop, which he basically drew by hand on a piece of 8.5 by 11. And then that was blown up to the size of the Met stage and then transferred to like a scenic drop or something. Does he actually like know how to work with actors? I don't know. Maybe
he won an Olivier, so he did something right.
No, he did something right. But for outstanding achievement, for what? For concept? For artwork? I would love to know what it's like to be directed by him. And to be like, actually, to have to figure out, like, what does this text mean? And what are your intentions behind this text? And how are you going to bring this character to life? I'm just curious.
That's fair.
I'd love to know. So let me know, Bill.
Because he's clearly listening, yeah.
Big fan of our show.
Almost as much as a fan as the Austrian guy who glued himself to a piano. This has been so done now by the, climate chaos protesters. And by the way, yes, climate chaos, it's a real thing. When someone glues themselves to like the middle of the freeway to prevent, traffic, or in this case, they're protesting pensions. Thank you. How are they removed?
Solvent.
Nail polish remover? Yeah.
Do they cut off their flesh? I wondered about this.
It depends on how much you care about the piano.
I think it's a lot of Crisco and some time.
Oh. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, Weston?
I hate this.
I feel like a lot of these protests, I think it's becoming obviously more popular to damage works of art, glue yourself to important things, and there's
the Van Gogh, the people that do the Van Gogh thing.
Yeah. It's very much in vogue right now in the protesting world, which I do get. Climate change especially is very pressing, and I don't know what the state of pensions is in Austria, but I know that in France they're protesting all that
Yikes.
right now. So,
Yikes.
I mean, like, sometimes if that's the only way you can be heard, I mean, I just hope the piano will be okay afterwards, And it's just the gold piano, just a real mess of an
What
instrument.
about the human being, Weston? What about the human being?
What about
he did it to
has anyone
himself.
thought of the piano?
No one's thinking about it.
Before we wrap
God.
the show up, PJ. So Oliver, in the on this day, American premiere of Lohengrin at the Met, 1871. I think PJ had dated it some years after that. Sounds like there's a bit of a discrepancy here.
No, that was the first one at the Met, which was not the first one in New York City.
Ooh.
Different.
Yeah.
Sit down,
You
George.
weren't paying attention to your
shut
own
up.
show.
Let's wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call. On Opera Box Score.
Oh my goodness. I feel like we were very spicy in taping the show. We were just kind of
It's been a very spicy
It's
episode.
kind of just not attacking each other, but just a lot
A
of
little bit of cayenne.
bit of teasing. Good call, bad call. It's how we're going to wrap it up. We're going to start as always. Oliver Camacho.
Well, if you're listening to this episode on the day it drops, that would be Maundy Thursday because we are in Holy Week for singers, also known as Hell Week. I saw last weekend a St. Matthew Passion and was debating whether or not I was going to go hear another one yesterday, presented by Music of the Baroque, because I just don't have time for that many recits. But I'm so glad I did. I wanted to go because Roderick Williams is like ne plus ultra, but it's only whatever, like 5% of the show are the baritone solos, so the rest is like a lot of evangelizing and a lot of long arias, and it's not my favorite piece of music. It's a very important piece of music. It's very impactful. I don't think you need to see it more than once a season. Man, am I so glad that I went. A transcendent performance of The Evangelist by a young tenor named Gwilym Bowen. I guess that's a Welsh name.
Must be Welsh, yeah.
He went to Royal Academy of Music. His repertoire is Bach, flute in Midsummer Night's Dream. He sings a lot of Handel and Monteverdi, but this young man was born to sing Matthew Passion Evangelist. It was so comprehensive. And I asked him after the performance, like, how long have you been doing this? Like, this is my 6th one. So in six tries, getting it to that much detail. This is, I don't know, it's basically like singing Siegfried or like singing, Norma. It's just like, it is the gigantic, role in the Bach Passions, and he was incredible. And you're going to hear more about Gwilym Bowen. I'm going to try to get him on the show even.
Weston Williams.
There's a really neat article. So apparently there's a in the one of the Smithsonian museums, there's an exhibition which has a lot of portraits of important people from marginalized groups that are that have made up the American artistic and pop cultural experience. And there was a photo included of the singer Chanina Redfeather, who was an opera singer at the turn of the century, and there's some old recordings of her. And I didn't know that much about her. I'd heard her name before in passing. But we're going to post a link to this article from the Smithsonian Magazine about her because it's fascinating. Because to have this indigenous woman on these opera stages and making these opera recordings at a time where, there was the genocide of indigenous Americans was almost complete in this country. It's just such a fascinating story of like this, of someone who is really genuinely popular, a really big deal in her day, who's kind of vanished from history a little bit, even from, the knowledge of people like me. And I just loved learning about it. And I want to seek out some of her old phonograph recordings, but really absolutely check it out. It's really, really fascinating. It's the Smithsonian Magazine article about Chanina Redfeather. It's really, really interesting.
Ashley Hardgrave.
I want to talk really quickly about a moment of bravery in a different part of the musical world. Kelsey Ballerini is a country music artist, and country music kind of, they're their home base is in the city of Nashville, Tennessee, which, you know, has gone through a couple of things in the last few weeks. And Kelsea Ballerini was hosting the CMT Awards, the Country Music Television Awards, last night. And she opened the show with a pretty bold statement about her thoughts on the incidents around the Nashville shooting and the number of mass shootings that have gone on in America. And it was we would consider it a thoughtful and kind move, but considering who the country music community traditionally serves, it was a little bit of a bold and a little bit of a controversial move. She went on, after continuing to host the broadcast, to perform on the stage with 4 drag queens. Now, you might know that drag has now all but been banned in the state of Tennessee. And so between speaking on gun violence and mass shootings and performing with drag queens at the beacon of country music in Nashville, Tennessee, she's getting a bit of backlash from some of the more conservative voices within her community. So for every listener to our show who is interested in boldness and bravery in the face of injustice, I encourage you to go to Spotify or whatever your streaming service is and just stream one Kelsea Ballerini song this week, just to help set that algorithm a little more on the right track.
If you're listening to the episode on the day that it dropped, it's also the first day of Passover. Good Pesach to all of you. The men's NCAA basketball will, of course, be a distant memory by that time, but what won't be a memory is one shining moment. It is the epic song, which is produced with a montage of the highlights of the entire tournament. This is like a Sportsando segment now. David Barrett, the lyrics start, "The ball is tipped, and there you are. You're running for your life. You're a shooting star." And it all...
Oh, dear.
It just makes me cry. Every time I watch One Shining Moment, I end up crying. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio Show about opera. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Send us a voice memo or even email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Find links to stuff we've talked about at our website, operaboxscore.com. And that's also where you can put your money where our mouths are. Give back to the OBS on the donate page. Your announcer is Norm Waddell. Your creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. And your audio editor is Weston Williams. For co-host Ashley Hardgrave with guest Daniel Gundlach, I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera, saying more about my inner world than any autobiography possibly could. We're back with an all-new show next week when we go Inside the Huddle with Matthew Principe, director of Livestreams at Boston Baroque. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more swans and second intermission exits. Join us.